Hello and welcome to the Arts Our Education Talk It Up podcast, where we talk to national, state, and local leaders who are working to make arts education part of every student's life. I'm Jim Palmerini, your host today. This podcast is part of an exciting new series, Meet NCAS, in which I talk to representatives of the member organizations of the National Coalition for Core Arts Standards, ARE sponsoring network. NCAS is a collaboration of 8 national arts and arts education organizations who actively work to ensure quality standards-based arts education opportunities for every student. Weekly, we're talking to their leadership about the organizations themselves and their perspective about the foundational focus of NCAS, that is K-12 arts education standards and their importance to the members and their field. And so today we are talking to Todd Shipley, President of the State Education Agency's Director of Arts Education, otherwise affectionately known as SEADAE. Welcome, Todd. So glad you are here.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here, and thanks so much for setting this up and allowing us to be a part of this.
You bet. I think that SEADAE is an organization that the field of arts education needs to know more about, so I'm really glad you're here. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about SEADAE. The organization's history, its mission and goals, if you could just elaborate on it, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Well, SEADAE is an organization, and like Jim mentioned, that acronym stands for State Education Agency Directors of Arts Education. And the organization has been around since 2005. In 2006, we achieved 501c3 nonprofit status, and we've been active ever since then in support of arts education. And essentially, our organization basically consists of those persons at state education agencies, so departments of education, state boards of education, whose responsibility is education in the arts. And in line with that, we have around 50 active members that represent 39 states plus the Department of Defense education activity. Some states here or there may have, 2 or 3 people that serve in an arts education role. Many of those states simply have that one singular person there. And of course, as you can tell, there are some states that simply don't have someone at that in that role in their state organization. With that being said, our mission is simply to support the professional effectiveness of our individual members and to provide a collective voice for leadership on issues affecting arts education. So I always like to say that our members sit at the nexus of where policy meets practice in our states. Our vision is that we see all pre-K 20 students gain artistic literacy and fluency through equitable access to quality, sequential, and most importantly, standards-based opportunities for learning in dance, music, theater, visual arts, and media arts as well.
So I'm so glad that you talked about the nexus, and I have always thought of SEADAE as kind of the liaison, the gatekeeper, the code breaker, so to speak, in a positive way, that serves as a conduit between public education, teachers, and those who are responsible for policy and regulation. Does that make sense? Is that?
Definitely, and yes, that's exactly right. Most of our members sit in a role in their education department where they are the singular voice on arts education matters. So they represent the teachers, the districts, the leaders in their state on arts education matters. And that can be anything from standards to instruction to curriculum to instructional materials to licensure to assessment.
Yeah.
The gamut is, it runs the gamut as far as what our members are responsible for doing. Many of them manage robust grants. They have engagement opportunities with partners across the state. They lead really exciting opportunities to highlight student work through galleries, through the state capitol, or with the governor's office. So lots of different tentacles, if you will, where our members are literally, like I mentioned, working on policy issues, but also working on practice. And in line with that, most of our members also significantly play a role in professional learning and professional development with educators in their states, or at least are able to contribute to that process.
So I know as public employees, of course, they cannot directly lobby and advocate for arts education. However, given the work that they do with professional development, with state through leaders around the districts in the state, it would seem that in their way, they most are certainly the champions for arts education in their individual states. So that's great. So moving from there, let's talk about standards. So from the perspective of public education, why are arts education standards important to schools in the first place, to the teachers and to the students and to the district?
Well, virtually every content area has standards. We're talking about English language arts. There's a huge national push right now in literacy that is standards-based as well. But what's important is that the arts are represented in that continuum so that we can understand that the arts are indeed part of the academic experience. They are just as important as other subject areas. They are essential to providing a well-rounded education. And in fact, because of its listing in ESSA as a well-rounded subject area, that gives us a lot of credence and lends a lot of credibility to the arts as a worthwhile subject area. We all know it is, but definitely having that in place to be able to lobby, as you said, and to really prove to others and decision makers that yes, this is a viable academic subject that's worthy of study by students. There's a long and varied tradition of research and theoretical literature for all the subject areas under the arts. And one of the things that I also think is true is that standards ensure equity in what we want students to be able to know, understand, and do upon successful completion, rather, of a course of study. And that's important because that equity piece really provides us with a stable groundwork and with a foundation from where we know that the arts and what the arts look like in various states across the nation, from community to community, and from really within schools inside districts. So, I'll visit a school here in my work in Tennessee, and I can go 2 miles down the road to a sister school in that same district, and the arts offerings will look completely different. So it's about establishing that footing to where we can then build upon the standards, our curriculum, and then interface with instructional materials and provide the opportunities for students so that we at least have equity and parity in finding the ground level for what we want students to be able to take from our arts classes.
And assuming all that work, because we are talking about within the standards, rigorous, sequential, scaffolded knowledge and skill that they should know, that we are simultaneously putting forth a call for teaching professionals as well.
Definitely. And I also think it's important too to mention how important these standards are to administrators.
Yes.
Many times in public schools and schools across the nation, you might have administrators who don't have that arts background or an arts knowledge. You may be lucky and once upon a time get an administrator that was a former music teacher or former visual arts educator, and that's amazing when you have that happen. But more often than not, they don't have that arts experience. And so this provides a way for them to be able to effectively provide support to their arts educators by being able to understand these commonalities between all the arts disciplines. I'll also add too that I think these standards are really crucial for our education preparation providers. So those colleges and universities that are teaching and training candidates to become teachers, knowing that we have a national teaching shortage, but also being able to strengthen that pipeline by encouraging and really rooting their instruction as education preparation into these standards so they know exactly what this looks like when they get to the field and when they get their first job as a K-12 public educator.
And so the state arts ed folks can also, they play a role in maybe working with those colleges and university prep programs, would you say?
Definitely. I think a lot of our positions really kind of act as that first line of defense, if you will, or that first point of contact for, I could say in my role here in Tennessee, I will often meet with our college and university supervisors who are the program area leads for the arts education specifically. So I'll meet with the music supervisors, I'll meet with the art supervisors, and it allows us that opportunity to once again be able to really take policy and again marry it to practice, to be able to relay to the field what we're seeing and what we know that our schools need, but also to get feedback, and valuable feedback, I will say, from those EPPs and those colleges and universities that honestly just help build a cycle of continuous improvement.
You mentioned the nationwide teaching shortage, and we're partly talking about in our post-pandemic era of education, are the standards playing a role in helping, and arts education in general, let me back up and say, arts education in general playing a role to getting students back into brick and mortar learning environments, would you say?
Most definitely. I think that, and I can speak for my colleagues across the nation and in other states in saying that really the arts were, certainly we took a lot of hits during the pandemic and there were certainly some steps backward, but at the same time, it's one of the content areas that's, the arts is something that actually draws students to school and keeps students involved in school in a positive and productive manner. So we've seen a lot of examples of where students are getting back into the swing of things with their arts studies. It's connecting students and connecting parents in the community to the schools. And so that's why it's so important that we strengthen it with those standards in there. Again, it provides that level base to where we have the standards, but it's also important for us to understand that curriculum and standards are two separate things. So the standards provide us with that foundation in which we build curriculum on top of that. And so certainly we've had to make some changes to curriculum. Maybe there's situations across the country where students missed out on arts opportunities for a year, maybe even 2 years. So it's important to understand where those students are, where their entry point is. And I think that our standards do a great job of allowing us to, with flexibility, meet those students where they are, but also scaffold the learning in a sense, but also to be able to have spiraling standards where we can come back to those standards later with a greater sense of rigor and greater depth to that experience, and just continue to enrich the educational experience for the student.
So in some ways, you've answered this question, but we'll talk about it anyway. The 2014 National Art Standards, they've been around almost 10 years. Something like 38 states have adopted those in one manner or another. How do you think those have actually impacted the field of arts education? If you think back to a time, the old joke about the earlier version of those standards was the only thing that bound them together was the binding in the book they were published in before we went digital. So any thoughts about that?
Definitely. I think what's important to understand there is how unifying these standards are between the different content areas, and understanding that, with respect to our standards, it's so easy to start the conversation about these, in 2014 were the new standards. It's easier to start that conversation from the connecting anchor standards or the foundations. So looking at those 11 shared foundations, that was really beneficial to our work here in Tennessee. You mentioned 38 states or so have adopted in some manner or another. In some situations, it's not been a wholesale adoption of the national standards. Some have used it as a starting point.
Right.
And that's what we did here in Tennessee in my own experience in my own state. And I will say that the fact that unification through all the subject areas was there really helped things with administrators. When we were training administrators, we were able to help them understand that, oh, maybe this person, this administrator understands music. Maybe they've had music teachers in their classroom, they've had visual art, whatever the state's circumstance may be in terms of whatever policy requires. But now they have a vehicle by which to understand what this can look like in theater, what it can look like in dance, what it can look like in media arts. And, I'll also say too, one of the struggles, and I think that we are at such a great time to start talking about the art standards once again, is that it really takes almost a decade for a major shift to happen in education. One of the challenges that we faced when we adopted our standards in Tennessee, and we adopted ours in 2016, they are closely mirrored to the national standards with a couple alterations here and there just to fit our specific circumstances in my state. It's similar to that in lots of other states as well. But one of the challenges that we faced was, number one, getting the information out there that, hey, yes, we have new standards. And number two, providing the training for those standards. So unpacking what it looks like. For us in this state, and I can speak for some of my colleagues as well, it was a big paradigm shift with our educators because our previous standards in my state, at least, were incredibly specific and were really task oriented with the learning objectives. And so the great thing about the new standards in 2014, what that allowed us to do is to start setting the expectation with teachers across our state that this is only our foundation. This isn't teaching or isn't telling you what your curriculum looks like. This is giving you a base on which for you to plug in your curriculum. And no, you don't lose the ability to incorporate skills development and learning targets and various different performance tasks as part of that. They can all be plugged in support of these standards. And so that was a large paradigm shift for us that really took some time to take hold, but training and professional learning and honestly getting our teachers together to perform or to serve in professional learning communities and to help and mentor each other was incredibly beneficial as part of that process. And I will also say too that, like I said, time is the factor there. It takes time for those things to in a shift like that to happen. There were teachers, 4 or 5 years into our process here in my state that didn't know about the new standards. And so I think that we are now at a point to where we can start talking about that again, looking back on that revision. And I'm happy to see that conversation happening nationally too.
You've been so great. I'm anticipating my question because I was going to ask you, imagine a teacher, this is kind of a coded question, who is still struggling with the idea of adapting his or her curriculum to these standards, because we all know there are some teachers that don't necessarily adhere to standards at all. So you answered this in some way, but what do you say to that teacher who is maybe intimidated the idea they think they're going to have to reinvent their arts curriculum no matter what it is? How can you, as the state Department of Ed guy, help them get over that concern?
You mentioned this earlier, how people in my role, we're sometimes limited by what we can say in the public sphere. We're all public employees. We have to adhere to the red line and to walk on a straight line with the government. And where I'm going with that is to know that really leaning on partnerships across my state, and I know my colleagues have done the same in other states across the nation, where we will partner with our state arts agencies. So like our Tennessee Music Education Association or the Tennessee Art Educators Association or Tennessee chapter of EdTA. The possibilities are endless there, because that's where our teachers oftentimes are most plugged in, would be at the local level. And so meeting them where they are has been really beneficial to form those partnerships with those organizations in our own state to help them provide the training and to I think about the teachers who are the one arts teacher in a district that's really small. Maybe it's incredibly rural. They're 90 miles from anywhere else. They just don't even have a colleague to lean on. Definitely don't have the support of administration in terms of being able to provide effective instructional support. Maybe they're a supportive administrator, but they just don't have the depth of knowledge to help this educator. And so that's why I think those local and state networks are incredibly important as part of that process. And I know that our colleagues nationally at NAFME and EdTA and NAEA have done remarkable work in that regard, and NDEO as well. And then I can also say too, that with this process, really meeting that teacher again where they are, but I think also pointing out the resources that are offered through the national standards is incredibly important to help teachers understand that, oh yes, I don't have to upend my entire curriculum that I've always used. I just need to figure out what I can plug in where and where it now fits in terms that everybody else can understand. An example there would be the model cornerstone assessments. And I think it's incredibly beneficial for teachers to look at those and to see, oh, they will see commonalities between what they've, quote, always been doing, but just beefed up to meet our standards, and to know that those standards really represent a new line of thinking, a 21st century, now that we're 23 years into it, way of doing things that's really separated from before, but it doesn't hamper, it doesn't limit the educator from doing, from exploring curriculum with depth and rigor. It only empowers them to meet students where they are and to have the flexibility to implement those.
I love that. That's a great button for us, empowering teachers and students, meeting them where they are. Todd, this has been great. We could talk for hours. However, we are going to wrap this up, and I just want to say thank you. I think, again, as I said at the outset, I think it's important that our viewers, veterans or newbies alike, understand how important the members of SEADAE are to the arts education ecosystem as it is today, as we come into this sort of new era of education. So with that, Todd, thank you for being here, and I'm going to do the awkward process of resharing my screen.
Perfect. And while you're doing that, Jim, I'll just wrap up quickly and say thanks once again for having me. But for those in states across the nation, if you are not connected with your SEADAE member in your state, your state's Department of Education representative, feel free to check out our website at SEADAE, SEADAE.org, and you can get to a member directory and learn who that person may be in your state. Reach out to them, form a connection. We value hearing from educators in the field, and I know my colleagues across the nation do too. So please become active and let us know how we can help.
God, you did my work for me. I was just going to say, you want to learn more? Yes, go to begin. As Todd said, reach out to your SEADAE member. You can find that SEADAE member right on the SEADAE website, and a lot of really amazing work. I was on the site today, and I'd forgotten all of the work that SEADAE has done over the years, white papers and so forth. So yes, www.seadae.org is where you can find that. And remember, State Education Agency Directors of Arts Education. Took me years to master that acronym. And also, if you want to learn more about NCAS, the National Coalition for Arts Standards, please visit the www.nationalartsstandards.org. Among other things, you'll find those amazing model cornerstone assessments that Todd was mentioning. And so also, don't forget, arts education is for everyone. So sign the ARE pledge indicating your support for arts education. If you have not already done so, urge your school board to pass the resolution to fund arts education in the 2023-24 school year coming up. And yes, that's right. You can donate to Arts Our Education to help us share the message. Again, Todd, thank you so much for being here. And signing off now until the next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeff.